Thank you, thank you, thank you. What are we all doing here today? I was told last year when I was rejected from the TED conference, by the way, thank you for having me this year, that my talk needed to have one thing. It needed to have a moment of profundity where the audience would realize something amazing about themselves and in turn, something amazing about the world. Now, I can't tell you about you, unfortunately. I mean, there's a lot of you here, and I'm sure you're all very nice people, but I've only got like 10 contacts in my phone. But I can tell you something about myself, and hopefully that will reflect onto you. And let me begin by saying something extremely obvious. We are all quite similar. We are, in fact, we share 99.9% of our DNA with each other. In many ways, we are basically clones. But that 0.1% is very important. That 0.1% is responsible for the likes of Mahatma Gandhi, and it's responsible for the likes of Boris Johnson. I wanted to put him in there. And that 0.1%, that uniqueness that we have, plays into a lot of things. It plays into our ideas. It plays into our culture, our politics, our sexual preference, our personal identity. But I can't talk to you about all of that today. I can only talk to you about one thing, and that's ideas, because I'm not an expert on all of that. My name is Robert Culligan, and as Gabby said before, I am the co-editor of Aberdeen-based media organization, Moist Magazine, and I have the great pleasure and privilege of studying politics and international relations at the University of Aberdeen. Now, I'm not a formally trained writer. I've written about certain issues in my past, and I write about things that interest me. I write about local political issues, I write about figures, and I write about my experiences. But my time writing has never been formal, and to be honest, I've learned two things from my time as a writer. Number one, it's controversial. I've lost friends because of my writing, and I have been on the bad end of a few anonymous internet comments. Secondly, it's probably the most rewarding thing, the most rewarding hobby, I mean, that I've ever had. Now, wrapped up in my hobby is an almost obsessive need to analyze and find new ideas. I see these ideas, I look for them, and then I try to find a way that I can promote them in Moist and see whether they run parallel to the ideas that we like to promote at Moist. And there's something very important about these ideas, and I've come to realize something about these ideas because they outline something very deep in all of us. I question what ideas I hold, and I question what ideas the student community holds. And there is a running theme throughout all of these ideas, that in every single idea that we have, there is a grain of truth. There's something that we're trying to find out about the world. It connects the world out there to the world in here. Now, if we think about the world for a second, it is mind-bogglingly complicated. It is just ridiculous. You go to university for 4 years, and you come out with a qualification with the ability to only study, to only focus on a tiny part of it. What does that mean? Perhaps our ideas are only partial solutions to impossible problems. But in that respect, it's important to realize that there are a lot of ideas out there. There are a lot of ideas that can give you hope. There are a lot of ideas that can make us feel scared. And there are a few ideas that I would like to pick up on, especially those post-ideas that are being thrown around. There's the idea of post-truth, There's the postmodern. There is the idea of postmodern. We live in a very post world, unfortunately. But there's an idea that I would like to pick up on called the post-empire. The post-empire is a word that came around. Well, of course, empire existed before that, but it started to be used in this context in around 2012. And the point of it is for a second, imagine an empire not defined by territory and people and armies, more defined by behaviors and ideas, mannerisms. It's an empire that exists within us rather than outside. And it came about in 2012 when a man called Bret Easton Ellis was trying to describe the very public breakdown of celebrity Charlie Sheen. And he noted at that point that there was a difference between the brand Charlie Sheen and the man Charlie Sheen. Because the brand Charlie Sheen was the face of family-friendly sitcom 2.5 Men, whereas Mr. Charlie Sheen, the person, was nothing like that. And he came to the conclusion that there's a lot of theatre in that. There's a lot of theatre in celebrity. Celebrities almost change their characteristics to suit trends. Perhaps they give money to charity to seem virtuous and to be more popular. And in that respect, I'm not saying that they are inauthentic in their use of charity. It's just that public exposure and moral virtue are quite intertwined. So what happens when we subvert these expectations? What happened to Charlie Sheen when he subverted the expectations that society had put out for him? Now, one of my favorite writers, Brianna Bebenwick, writes, when commenting on this issue of the empire, she says, "Empire is essentially complete delusion, misguided ideas and the inordinate investment in the power of celebrity, patronizing political correctness that actually covers up insidious oppression and hides truly damaging opinions, an overall denial of the ultimate frailty and delicateness of human existence, an attitude of self-righteousness and indestructibility, hiding behind politically correct outrage." Now, I want to pick up on that for a second because it really hits me where I live. I mean, I would say that I wouldn't be I don't consider myself a victim of such a politically correct outrage, but I do consider myself as a perpetrator. My writings don't extend me far enough my platform doesn't extend far enough in order to have me be the victim of such an outrage. And that picks up on a lot of issues that I'm talking about. And when it comes to being a victim and being a perpetrator, there are two very distinct characteristics that you have to bear in mind. There is an asymmetrical power relationship between consumer and creator when it comes to sparking such an outrage. To be the victim of an outrage, your works have to travel a certain distance. They have to be noteworthy. They have to stand out from the crowd. But in order to be the perpetrator of such an outrage, you just have to be one of the pitchfork-wielding mob. And I would say that I'm probably more of a perpetrator because it reminds me of an event that happened at this university a few months back. The George Galloway incident when a politician who I would say had less than savory views came and spoke for the PIR Society, and a few students decided to storm the stage and glitter this man. And inside that, there were certain things that really triggered me. I started to think, was it the right thing to do? Was it the best way to express an opinion? Where does that leave us as a community? So I got on the computer and I wrote an article and I picked up on a few points and I came to the conclusion that that this would truly affect the way that the outside world perceives us in the Aberdeen student community. But inside that article, there was a certain brashness, an arrogance that I didn't quite want to own, because I felt that I didn't have to engage with what I had said, and I didn't have to engage with the people that I was commenting on. I could attribute motivation to them, I could attribute reason without any investigation over who they are or why they did what they did. I simply had my opinion and they had theirs. But ultimately, I didn't realize this until someone came along and decided to write 150 words about why they agreed with me. Now, it sounds like a nice thing. It sounds like a nice thing to have someone agree with you. But to be honest, it was the thing that really took me down a level. It took me down because it realized that I didn't challenge anyone. I didn't challenge a thing. There was nothing innovative in my piece. There was nothing offensive or new. It was simply there to be agreed with or disagreed with. And I feel like that could be the worst thing of all. But appealed to something that I desperately wanted for me, and I desperately wanted for Moist. A celebrity, perhaps popularity. And I still think about today whether I wrote that whether I wrote that piece for authentic reasons or whether I wrote it out of outrage. Those people that day weren't playing by my rules. But that brings me back to the point I was talking about earlier. I was talking about celebrity. Now, look at where we are today. Look at the world that we live in. Having a voice nowadays depends on whether you have access to the internet. And before the internet, it was television. Before the television, it was radio. And before radio, it was print media. Now, when we consider things like old media, we have to realize that there was only so many pages in the newspaper, only so many hours in the day to broadcast your voice. So inevitably, resources were scarce. And with those scarce resources came interests and censorship. But if you look at where we are now, so I'd like to ask you a question. How many of you get your news from social media as a primary source? Like, where do you get on Facebook and you see what your friends are posting and stuff like that? Just a quick show of hands. Quite a few of you. And how many of you watch BBC World News by any chance? Does anyone know how many views BBC World News gets in a week? BBC World News gets around 348 million a week. Now let's switch over to a creator-led site like Facebook or Facebook and YouTube. Does anyone know how many views they get, by the way? Anyone? Okay. Facebook and YouTube. Facebook gets 8 billion a day. YouTube gets 5 billion a day. That's quite a big number. You have to kind of take that in. But think about that for a second. That means that the future, the focus is on our smaller creators. The focus is on creator-led sites rather than large media corporations. The focus is on you and everyone in here. But with that focus comes strings attached. It comes celebrityhood. And when we talk about celebrity, we're talking about cutting parts off yourself. We're talking about making yourself fit in. We're talking about taming your opinions. And that's what the empire does to someone. And the post-empire is the opposite of that. Empire is that clean-shaven person that you meet sometimes. Empire is overly polite. Empire is the feeling that truth will just come to you. Empire is the feeling that authority is looking out for you. Empire is the cultural stick we all have up our arse. But if there's one thing that I want you to leave with today, is that this isn't a bad thing. I'm not calling anyone out or something, because there's a truth here that I would like to outline, that inside all of us is something very authentic. There is a genuine need, and we all yearn for an authentic human interaction. This is an interaction that cannot be bought or sold. It cannot be forced, but it can be hidden. The article at Moist will stay up as an example of how not to criticize someone. And finally, when it comes to yourself, believe in yourself. Express your ideas honestly. Comment. Don't be afraid to be wrong once in a while. And if you're not feeling stupid, you're probably not heading in the right direction. Thank you.